Welcome back. All right, so 10 days ago, I did a video where I made my Stanley Cup pick for this year. Now, what I've got on the board here is numbers 1 through 32. You know what that means, power rankings format. So, the Stanley Cup winner that I picked was Colorado. It's been 10 days. If you're going to check it out, you probably already would have. If you want to go check that out, you can. And then I had them winning in the Stanley Cup final over the New York Rangers. So, to me, those have to then be the two, in my eyes, most likely Stanley Cup champions for 2023. Colorado, the defending champions. I don't see any reason why not. The New York Rangers with Shesterkin and just what they've got going on, it feels like there's a lot of momentum in New York. So 3 through 32, a little bit different. And of course, doing a power rankings where I reveal the teams at the top, it just feels like that's a better way to go about it when it comes to who's most likely. Number 3, Tampa. Tampa, two-time champions in 2020 and 2021, should not be discounted as potential Stanley Cup champions for 2023. So to me, yes, they're still contenders. They've been in the last 3 Stanley Cup finals. While it looks unlikely they'd go to a 4th, well, there weren't that many picking them to go to a 3rd either. And certainly back-to-back Stanley Cups, not something that's easy to achieve. Tampa Bay's already proven a lot of people wrong. So 4th on the list, I have Carolina. The Carolina Hurricanes, under Rod Brind'Amour, if they can figure out the offensive side of it, I've talked about this, but in the playoffs, it wasn't, I didn't think it was the defense, the goaltending let them down. I thought it was just they didn't get the goals they needed when they needed them. So if they turn that around this year, yep, they can absolutely win themselves their 2nd ever Stanley Cup. Now, number 5 on the board, Florida. The Florida Panthers win their 1st round since 1996. Feels like they're on a bit of an upswing, and so to me, they are true contenders. So that's the thing, too, and the question becomes one of who the true contenders are or aren't, and that'll lead to a whole bunch of debate all around the hockey world at any time that you ask that question, anytime that you speculate on who might be contenders. So one thing that stands out is in the top 5, there's no Canadian teams. So at number 6, I remedy that problem with the Edmonton Oilers, a Final Four team this past season. No reason to think that they can't continue to build from there. Ken Holland certainly in the news plenty in the offseason. The interesting thing too to me with Holland is that there's been a lot of head scratching about some of the choices that he's made. Most of them have worked out pretty well. So Holland kind of a throwback in how he does things, but he's got the Oilers in a position where I think they are contending. So at number 7, I have Calgary. So the Battle of Alberta truly joined now atop this board. For the Flames, they did get out of the 1st round. They did get into the 2nd. And then after that, I mean, they did run into the Oilers, and they didn't make it into the conference final because the Oilers did. The Flames, though, making some changes in the offseason. I'm interested to see what Kadri does for them. Kadri down the middle, Lindholm, and who ends up being the number 1 center, and what kind of point totals, goal totals we're going to see from them. I think it could be a very entertaining year for Calgary fans. Which brings us to the end of the top row, St. Louis. St. Louis I've got there if Binnington can pick up where he left off in this past playoffs, right? That's the question mark I have with St. Louis is, okay, but is the goaltending really going to be good enough to get them through 4 rounds? So, that to me is the top row. That is the most likely. And then we move into the 2nd row. Toronto. Now, Leaf fans will say that it's hate that I've got them in 9th. The reality is this is a team that hasn't won a round. They've been in the playoffs every year for quite a while now, and they cannot get past that 1st round. So when I was ranking this and I was trying to figure out where I wanted to put the Leafs, I feel this is the most fair spot. They don't get out of the 1st round. 8 teams get out of the 1st round. And I just feel like these 4 teams here, the Rangers, Tampa, Carolina, Florida, are really and truly the contenders in the East. Look at it. You got 4 from the West, 2 from each division, 4 from the East, 2 from each division. So, by my count, that's pretty fair, but it does mean that I would favor Tampa or Florida in a series against Toronto if that's how it turned out, unless Tampa Bay and Florida go against each other, which I wouldn't rule that out either. But, yeah, Toronto for me, again, they've got to prove they can do it in the playoffs. Regular season, I expect lots of wins. I expect some really high goal scoring totals from guys like Matthews. But I really do wonder with the playoffs. Number 10, Pittsburgh. So why Pittsburgh? Mainly Crosby. Honestly, Crosby. It is my statement, and I say it each time. I don't bet against teams that have Sidney Crosby on them. He has 3 cup rings. He wants a 4th. I don't see any reason why he can't get one. There are various reasons that they weren't able to get out of the first round recently. Whether you want to look at 2020, 2021, or 2022, there's various reasons each time. So really, they just need things to fall their way. And I don't bet against Sid. That being said, 10th, obviously I don't have them in the upper echelon of contenders. Number 11, and this one this is one of those things. So Vegas misses the playoffs, right? So I'm supposing, okay, so they're gonna get better, and for Vegas, right, they should be in some form of contention. I expect there will be some overrating with Vegas because we do see that. And I was concerned that maybe I was overrating Vegas. Absolutely. But I thought about it. I thought about their roster as opposed to the other teams that are below them here. And I'm good with them being at 11th on the board. And it means they're the 3rd team in the Pacific out of 11 teams. So, again, the divisions are pretty even, I think, around the NHL. And Vegas should rebound this year. They should be a playoff team. In 12th spot, Minnesota, if not for the salary cap problems they have, if they've been able to make certain upgrades in the offseason, I'd have them higher. But I do wonder how well they're going to do this year. The pressure's there on the team, but the biggest pressure point really is that dead cap money with buying out Parise and Suter, and I think that hurts their overall standing when it comes to who's the Stanley Cup contender. At 13th, Kings. The Kings are getting back into... I mean, and again, with contention, it's such an odd terminology, but it's there. I'm already reading all these articles about whose window's open and whose isn't, which is fine. I try not to speculate on that because I think it gets kind of silly. Because there are teams that have won the Stanley Cup when their window was supposedly closed. Pittsburgh's done it. Detroit's another one that did it when, everybody's too old, they're not going to win, and then they'd win again. And for the Rangers, I remember going into 94, there were plenty of people that looked at all these former Oilers and other players being added and saying, well, that's not going to work. And then it did. So the LA Kings may end up being underrated when we look at this board later. At 14th, Washington. So Ovechkin, he's obviously going to get a lot of goals. Could score 50 or more, but even if he only scores 40 or 45, that's remarkable at this stage in his career. For me, with Washington, I do wonder if they're going to be able to, get back into that upper echelon with teams like Carolina and the Rangers and the momentum that they have. Could Washington threaten that? And it feels like this is a team that could fall off when it comes to cup contention. 15th, Nashville. So Nashville Predators, a middle-of-the-road team. However, in 2017, they showed when they are underdogs, they excel. For the Nashville Predators, they absolutely seem to prefer to be the underdogs, as their 2017 run was followed by one in 2018 that didn't go as far. Even though if you look at the regular season standings, they were a better team in 2018, but then come playoff time, they were not able to get past round 2. So Nashville, to me, is number 15. The first team that I cheer for gets on the board at 16, and it's Dallas. Now, for Dallas to win a Stanley Cup, A, you have to sign Jason Robertson. B, you should probably sign Jason Robertson. And C, if you haven't signed Jason Robertson while I've been whining here, why aren't you calling Jason Robertson or his agent right now and signing him? That being said, if they get him in the lineup, everything goes well, and if Ottinger can play in a playoff series the way he did against Calgary, and they win, because that's been the challenge, then Dallas could be a dark horse, absolutely. So that's your top half, right? That's your top half. I'm trying not to take too much of your time today with this, because again, it's just a fun speculation, right? It doesn't really mean a lot. It's not like, oh, well, my team's not winning a cup because. However, at 17th, Boston. They're older. They've got injuries to start the season. I don't know that they're a playoff team this year. And so I'm putting Boston at 17th. And again, this is in terms of likelihood to win the Stanley Cup. And looking at Boston and saying, can they go through 4 rounds? And I don't see a team with Boston that can. It's been a depth problem they've had. which has propped up at different times. 2017, it was depth on the blue line that was exposed as an issue when the Ottawa Senators took out a number of their top four defensemen, and they just couldn't recover. And then it felt like last season they just did not have the depth down the middle. Now they've got Krejci back, but Krejci and Bergeron are older. Marchand's hurt to start the season. They're missing McAvoy. There's a lot of things that with Boston, again, we're talking about a Stanley Cup here. I just don't see it. Number 18. So this is where it's a little bit odd, right? So I got Columbus at 18, but I do think Columbus makes the playoffs. So when I'm doing this ranking, the way I look at it is, okay, if all 32 of these teams were in a tournament to decide a Stanley Cup and didn't, everybody makes the playoffs, I don't know that Columbus would have the necessary pieces to win a Stanley Cup, right? So this is a team that's had troubles with playoffs. It got better in 2019 with knocking out Tampa. They won the play-in round against Toronto in 2020, but in general, the playoffs have been a struggle for the Columbus Blue Jackets. So I've got them at 18th on the board. At 19th, Vancouver. So if not for Columbus, it would have been Dallas, Boston, Vancouver in that order. Now, Vancouver as well, I have them above the playoff line, but Stanley Cup, hold up a little bit. And I only say that because they are my favorite team. I assume that any team that is my favorite will never win anything. See the San Diego Padres in baseball, good example. If you go to football, you've got the San Diego, now LA Chargers, and you've got the Cincinnati Bengals. And to me, they'll always be the San Diego Chargers. I don't care. But these teams don't win. So I don't look at, even having Vancouver at 19th, I was like, oh man, really? It seems high to me. And I say that as a fan that just, it's been, but they've got JT Miller, they've got Thatcher Demko. There's a lot of good things going on with this team. I do think they can make the playoffs, but an actual Stanley Cup, that's a bridge I found myself unable to cross for them, right? So many apologies to all out there, but I have the Canucks at 19th. At 20th, Winnipeg. And I could swap Winnipeg, Vancouver, sure, but for Winnipeg, there is definitely an issue. You don't strip the captaincy off of Blake Wheeler if there isn't an issue. And, of course, Rick Bowness, just getting to know the guys. It could take a little bit. And for Winnipeg, it's about, being able to make the playoffs. And while on paper, they're a good team, on paper hasn't necessarily translated to on the ice. So maybe that'll change this year, but I have them at 20th. 21st, New York Islanders. Missed the playoffs this past season. And then Barry Trotz was let go. I think a Stanley Cup's probably a little bit too far to expect. But however, that being said, they're the team that gave Tampa Bay the toughest challenge in both of their Stanley Cup runs in 2020 and 2021. So if the Islanders can make it this year, who knows? Number 22, Detroit. So this is where we're truly getting into the teams that are probably unlikely to win a Stanley Cup in 2023. But Detroit has so many good young players. I think their goaltending tandem is going to surprise people. So, yeah, I put Detroit at 22. And again, we're at the point where it's kind of a, well, I guess I'll put this team ahead of this team, being aware that neither of them are likely to win a Stanley Cup. Which brings me to number 23, which is Ottawa. The Sens, of course, a team that it looks like they're on their way up. The fact that the Senators are at 23 on this board, and if I'd made this board, say, 3 seasons ago, they would have been 32nd. So Ottawa, the build is there, and it feels like they're headed in the right direction, but a Stanley Cup might be a little too much to ask. And hey, at 24, it's the New Jersey Devils. So for the Devils and Devils fans, they might be looking at Ottawa and saying, well, why not us? I've seen that, and you know what? They're right. That being said, there's a lot that has to come together for New Jersey. The goaltending has to be better than last year. So I have New Jersey at 24. It would take a lot, right? You'd have to see like Jack Hughes reaching probably 95 point levels. Heischer and Hughes both have to stay healthy the full season if this team is going to, get into that spot where they are a contender and they could win a Stanley Cup. And it is a lot to ask. So there's your third row, which again is your probably unlikely. Yeah, probably unlikely. Which brings us to number 25, the bottom row, Buffalo. Buffalo's moved up as well from where they would have been a few years ago, right? And Buffalo's trending in the right direction. And today they extended Kevin Adams' contract. I would love to see Greg Adams in the NHL again on some level, but I digress. Kevin Adams, the actual GM for the Buffalo Sabres, gets an extension today. And I think that's it's not odd, really, because it's Buffalo and it's about selling fans on hope, but they haven't made the playoffs yet under Adams. So we'll see how it turns out this year. But I think Buffalo, I think that's their plan. I think if you ask Kevin Adams, honestly, you gave him true serum and asked him honestly, I think his answer would be, I want playoffs this year. So, yeah, Buffalo, 25. At 26, Anaheim. The Anaheim Ducks, in the event that they made the Stanley Cup playoffs, I think they would have a better chance than these teams down here. That's really the only way I can go with that. There's some good young players here, but contender, that's probably not where I would put the Anaheim Ducks right now. They're ahead of the number 27 San Jose Sharks. So again, in my eyes, the Sharks, a team that is going through at least some sort of a retool. We're not going to call it a rebuild. We're not going to acknowledge the rebuild, but yeah, things in San Jose have not been optimal since really since what 2019. It's gone off the rails a bit for them. So we'll see if that continues, but I put them at 27. And then we get into the ones that just, I think I can come out and say, I'm pretty sure these teams don't win the Cup. Starting with Seattle at 28. Now, this is where things are interesting too. So Seattle comes into the league, and they didn't really live up to expectations. And again, I've talked about that being the Vegas effect. The reality is that a team going into their second season in the National Hockey League, being ahead of four others, as far as I'm concerned, when it comes to potential Stanley Cup hopes, I think that's not too bad. I mean, it's not where Vegas would find themselves going into their second year, but it's not the worst. It's not like they had 8 wins, and we're talking about them trying to double their win total this year. They didn't do what I think they would wanted to, but it wasn't that bad, right? 29th, Philadelphia. So again, as I said, we're now into the it's not likely. Philadelphia is making the effort, right? At least publicly. And Chuck Fletcher believes that he's on the right path and that this team is going to get better. Brings in Tortorella not because he's planning a rebuild, but because he wants to have that quick turnaround. And so whether or not he gets there, I admire the effort. You can admire the effort of a guy who ends up losing his job, of course. So if Fletcher wants to keep his employment, I would think that kind of has to work out. If we see a disastrous season and we have sound bites coming out from Tortorella every other day, as entertaining as that'll be for us as fans, it would not help the job for at least in terms of his certainty he'll have a job in the morning. Wouldn't help Fletcher at all. Then at number 30, and we're really into 3 teams here that I really had to think about. Montreal I have at 30. Now, there are fans who speculate they'll bounce back. And I don't doubt that they can bounce back on some level, but I don't see playoffs. They're going to be missing Carey Price, looks like probably for the whole season again. And there's a lot of uncertainty. There's contracts they can trade out, sure. There's contracts they have traded out. There's a lot of speculation about whether or not Gallagher is going to finish the season there. There's speculation about basically anybody not named Suzuki. The Suzuki and Caulfield would be 2 untouchables. Slavkovsky would be an untouchable right now. Is there another untouchable in Montreal? It might be a reason to do a video as well at some point. Who are the true untouchables? Because, again, those untouchables can end up getting traded later. So at 31, Chicago. Press conference today, pretty obvious that new coach Luke Richardson, not really looking to lose every game. He's not tanking, and right for him. Because, honestly, he's waited a long time for this opportunity to be a head coach in the NHL. Yeah, you want to make sure that you look good. So if they win some games that they shouldn't, it might hurt their chances of drafting first. And I already saw an article for that today on The Athletic, which was basically along the lines of, so Chicago's bad, but are they not bad enough to maybe get that number 1 pick? Should they be worse? So there's that. But yeah, Chicago, we'll see. Which means, yeah, Arizona's at the bottom. Arizona, very unlikely we'll see the Stanley Cup being held up at ASU and carried around the ice. I'm sure fans would be ready to congratulate Arizona if they did win a Stanley Cup and would say, see, we always believed that hockey could work in the desert. Here we are. And that's not going to happen. But anyways, it's a moot point because, yeah, Arizona winning the Stanley Cup to me won't happen. So to me, the top 8, I guess you can say, true contenders. These 8 I would qualify as dark horses, and it includes Toronto because no one expects anything of them in the first round. I've said before, it doesn't matter what Toronto does during the regular season. Every post will be, yeah, wake us up in March and April and tell us how they're doing. Down here is your unlikelies, but sure, why not maybe? And down here, to me, that qualifies as really true dark horses. If you put money down on that, you're probably not getting your money back. So there's that. Anyways, there you go. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. As always, don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through, you just happened upon this video. I just thought this would be fun to look at. You guys can let me know your thoughts. As always, I will talk to you again soon.